discussion on China's outlook. So it's a window for our panelists and also for our audience to get to know about China's policy shifts, its key areas of reforms, its investment opportunities and challenges, and how China is interacting with the rest of the world. And so we had very great panelists today, so I hope everyone can enjoy the session. And we will open to the floor with more questions, so please bear in mind that you can ask your questions, the questions you want to ask, towards the end of the session. OK， 所以就大家如果在用这个同传的时候的话，不说话的时候，平常可以放在这个膝盖上，不然它这个声音会有这个啸叫，会相互的影响。So now you're watching 对话 from Davos。大家好，我是央视财经频道的主持人李思璇。您现在收看到的是中央电视台和达沃斯论坛共同从2018年世界经济论坛的现场带给大家的这一场电视对话。那今年呢，咱们要谈论的主题啊是新时代的中国机遇 China in the New Era。我们说这个新时代啊，其实是一个重点词。因为在19大报告当中，我数了一下，新时代这个词呢，其实一共出现了36次。
New era has been highlighted 36 times, which it means something. This is not just a jargon. It actually represents a very deep, it represents deepening and important reforms. And it's not only for China, it also means new opportunities for the world. Therefore, this is our subject matter today. I would like to make a brief introduction.
那么首先呢，坐在我旁边的这位，相信大家这个从去年之后也知道是咱们 这一场论坛的一位老朋友了，他是中国国资委的主任肖亚庆先生。那么去年之后呢，是再次来到了咱们的这一场论坛，而且呢，也是带领着，其实现在我已经看到很多熟悉的这个面孔哈，10几位中国的大型国企的掌门人，多数都是坐在现在的这个前排。其实大家呢也是怀着一颗深度和这个世界交流的心，来到了咱们的达沃斯论坛。所以说非常欢迎肖主任，也非常欢迎各位。
So I would like to welcome Mr. Xiao and welcome all the distinguished guests.
坐在旁边的这位呢，其实也是咱们的老朋友，他是经济合作与发展组织执行秘书长古利亚先生 ，Mr. Angel Gulia, Secretary General of the OECD. Welcome.
Of OECD.
中间的这位呢是汇丰银行控股公司的主席马克塔克。 Mr. Mark Tucker, HSBC Group Chairman with 30 years of finance experience in Asia and Europe. Welcome. 同时啊，他其实还是曾经是一个职业的这个足球运动员。刚才在下面跟他开玩笑说啊，说这个其实这方面可能他有很多的可以和咱们中国的观众朋友们可以分享的一些经验。确实曾经是职业的。
Indeed, he was a professional athlete. 那在旁边这位非常美丽的女士呢，她是伦敦政治经济学院的教授金克瑜女士。那么她本人的研究方向呢，其实就包括这个中国经济和全球化。不要看她这么的年轻啊，其实非常非常的资深。我也读了很多的，不管是中文还是英文，您写的这个论文，相信今天您也一定有许许多多的这个独到的见地和大家一块来分享。最远端的这位我们大家也都非常熟悉了，那他呢是弘毅投资的董事长赵立欢先生。那么其实呢也是一位懂中国又懂世界的资深的投资者，欢迎。 所以很棒啊！哈，我们看到今天的， So we have a great panel here
政府、国际组
from
织、
the
商界、
government,
学界、
international
来自全球的
organizations,
这样的重量级嘉宾
academics,
都汇聚
and
在了一起，咱们探讨这样的一
many
个主题：新
guests
时代
from
的中国
different
机遇。
sectors
但在
are
今天的
present
这样的一个
here
时点啊，
today.
有人说今天有
In
点像这
fact,
个达沃斯论坛的一个中国日，
many
因为
people
有
say
很
that
多的议
today
程其实是和
marks
咱
the
们
China
中国
Day
相关的，
of the
尤其
Davos
是在今天
Forum.
早
Why do
上
we say
看到
that?
刘
Because
贺主
today
任
we
做
have
了
a
这样一个
series
非
of
常精彩的
seminars
一个
and
演
sessions
讲，其实也
related
重
with
申了
China.
去年习
And
近
this
平主席
morning,
在达沃
Mr.
斯论
Liu
坛开幕
has
式上所
given
提
a
出的
great
这样的一个主
speech
张。
regarding
那
the
我也想问一
development
下
of
肖主任，
China.
听了
And
这样的
last
一个
year,
刘主任的
Chairman
演
Xi
讲以
was
后，您
also
最深
present
刻的
here.
一些感受是什么？因为他讲
So
的
I
这个
would like to
未
ask
来几
you
年的
what
一些经济政策会对
what's
全球
your
带来的
take
机遇，
on
您有什么感
what's
受？
being talked about this
今
morning?
天非常高兴啊，
Indeed, it's a great pleasure to be here to participate in this dialogue. And this morning, after hearing Mr. Liu's speech, I feel that I really agree that the opportunities for China means the opportunity for the world, as we could see from the past years. Last year, after the 19th CPC Assembly, it has laid out a roadmap and the new goals for future developments of China. The economic development will be adjusted from high-speed growth to high-quality growth. I believe that representatives present here today, many of you are also going through adjustments and reform, and this is exactly what we're doing. Towards the domestic market, we will like to enhance the domestic-led stimulation and growth. In terms of external actions, we would like to open up and cooperate more with multinationals and other sectors around the world. All these reforms and development will be able to bring new opportunities to enterprises and companies. But all these opportunities also mean renewed opportunities for the world. That's why I say opportunities for China is opportunities for the world. We know that today, this year marks the 40th anniversary of China's opening up and reform. So it's very timely that we talk about this issue. So if we want to summarize this new era in one sentence, how would you say it? And what are the most fundamental or significant reform that China will undertake? So what do you think this new era really means? New era, I think, means a new starting point in terms of historic transition that will take us up to the next level. We have new goals laid down in front of us, which will grant us more opportunities, more development, and we'll see the emergence of new service, new products, and new companies as well as new entrepreneurs. Yes, I understand that you stressed the transitioning from high-speed growth to high-quality growth in terms of the economy. So I would like to raise the question to Mr. Gurria.
So what would be your interpretation of China's new era? And what are some of the key areas of reforms that you're looking at?
Well, thank you for the invitation. The 19th Party Congress defined the new era, so we don't have to be reinventing the wheel all over the place. It's a greater focus on what I would call the quality of growth. And there was an express trade-off. They say, no longer will we sacrifice environmental and economic efficiency for the sake of short-term gains. We'll go for the medium and the long-term view, which is a very Chinese way to do things anyway, rather than maximizing the short-term gains, because we understand that development is a medium and long-term challenge. So this is quite important. The word openness, together with coordination, sharing, innovation, and green development. Those are the 5 key words of the 13th five-year plan, where we had the question of the new era. So this is a key pillar of the Party Congress. And now we welcome this opening up, further opening up of China. We think it's a win-win prospect. We think that, this China should continue to make progress on things like the Services Trade Restrictiveness Index, the foreign direct investment, the regulatory side. They made a lot of progress, but I think still in a number of areas China remains more restrictive than most of the OECD countries. It's made a lot of progress, but again, more room for reform. in our FDI, Foreign Direct Investment Restrictiveness Index, China is one of the top reformers. That means it may not be at the top, but it has moved the most in terms of removing a considerable number of the restrictive measures. Now, but still many services remain off limits. Efficiency gains, for example, you could curtailing competition in a number of sectors.
I think we can go into some of the details later, but then I think you made a very important point.
New era, about globalization with things like global playing field, defining rules-based inclusive globalization, where China is benefiting, and of course, which was heralded here last year by President Xi Jinping in his address to the plenary of Davos.
Yeah, so all different areas of high quality development. So you had a very close study of the report, and thank you very much for your input. And Mr. Tucker, I actually have a more specific question for you about China's significant move in terms of financial opening, because we know that last November, Beijing announced a new set of policies to lift foreign ownership limits for the financial sector. So what does that mean for global players like HSBC?
Thank you. I think just to support what both Mr. Xiao and Mr. Correa have said, I think and let me take the answer to the question sort of in context of what's happened and the 19th National Congress. Again, we consistent with my two colleagues on the panel, I think view this as a clear shift in both social and economic development and the way also significantly that China engages with the world. Domestically, as has been said, the emphasis is now on building, I think, again, the words used, some for the first time, a sustainable and inclusive economy, where, again, the quality of growth is just as important as the quantity. And, again, that is a very clear move. Interesting internationally, and coming to your point, China is becoming more active, and it's advancing its own form of multilateralism, which I think, again, the President Xi has called a new option for the world. And we believe that the main impact of this is pretty profound and something that can lead to the creation of a more integrated global economy. So it is very significant. So I think the elements of clearly the past 70 years or so, China's relationship with the rest of the world has been defined by the objective of moving to a great modernized socialist country, and its strategy in international affairs has been clearly managed to do that. The approach hasn't changed, but I think but continues to evolve, and we're seeing that as the economy internationalizes. It's natural that China will play a larger role in a more active approach to foreign affairs, and again, the impact of that is profound, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. Within the financial services space, clearly we saw at the end of last year opening up on the banking side to a degree, on the insurance side very significantly. I think moving over 3 to 5 years to 100% ownership in China is a major step. It's something we have been talking about for 15 or 20 years. Yep. So I think it's profound in its implications and indicative of a positive and constructive approach. So all of this is a consistent backdrop to the 19th Party Congress speech.
Yeah, thank you for the input. Ke Yu.
So let me start in English because of what I want to address in terms of what we perceive as a new era. I think that we are focused too much on a financial story of yesterday. You know, the dollar as a reserve currency, the US financial crisis and aftermath. The financial history or the financial story of today and tomorrow is going to be about China, China's financial integration. So what is new, and I'm not sure the world is yet prepared for it, is a few firsts of an emerging country. Number one, it is the first time a country with only 25% of GDP of the US is leading in many core areas of technology. Number two, it is the first time ever that the second largest economy
is a middle-income superpower. That has enormous consequences for the global financial arena. As we encourage China to open up more, are we prepared for potentially greater volatility, exchange rate volatility, capital controls? Because what I think is lacking still, even though we've heard so many positive aspects of it, and I'm completely in agreement, is that China still lacks the micro foundations in the financial industry with many more speculators than institutional investors. And in that kind of situation, when China opens up completely, is the world ready to absorb the kind of shocks and volatility that even a little tremor of China can send shockwaves to the global economy? So I would pose it as China's ready for opening up, but is the rest of the world?
很有意思的一个观点哈。今天早上刘鹤主任其实反复传达的一个重心就是开放，但是在这样的一个过程当中，中国和世界是相互交流的。中国的开放对于中国来说意味着什么？对于世界来说意味着什么？是不是都准备好了？我觉得这个是值得大家去深思的抛出来的一个非常有意思的一个问题。赵总，简短的跟我们说一下您的观点。
对十几年来
So please, Mr. Zhao, please share your experience with us.
资金投入中国实体经济。
Over the past decades, I have been actively participating in investment in China, and I have been participating in Davos Forum for more than a decade. But this time, I have a whole new feeling. In 2008, when the financial crisis hit, we can see that people had high expectations of the Chinese market and hoping that as a rising power, China will shoulder our share of responsibilities. And our premier also said that China will, of course, take its responsibilities. And that means doing our job well, doing what we do well. 10 years later, now we saw that when the economy came to recovery and we still faced with the governance issue, he said, our representative said, we have to participate in the sharing, coordinating, and the consultation of the new world order. So if we compare the statement of the 2 points of time, between one decade, you can see the shift in the point of stance of China. The economy needs to be shared worldwide, and this was true in the past and will be true in the future. Most importantly, China can play a greater part in contributing to the governance. For example, what does the market do? What does the technology or private sector do? I think in these aspects, China can contribute more in its governance. This is more important than the GDP growth of China. Some people said that in 2017 we're doing much better than the past. But how we behave when things are going well, it really indicates the level of governance we have. Which means when you're doing well, you have to think about fixing the system and not to wait until it's too late. And China, in this regard, is doing a great deal of work, which can provide us reference. So, sharing our economic growth, contributing to a new concept, and the participation in forming new governance rules will be the three arenas where China will have a positive impact in the world. Indeed, this is a very good opening to our discussion. As you know, in this new era, in the wave of globalization, China is already an integral part of the world.
之前人民日报联合北外丝绸之路研究院呢调查了很多这个全球的年轻人，他们感受到了哪些中国现在正在影响着世界的一些力量？调查的这个结果呢是包括了5个方面，说有基础建设、科学技术、创新企业、生活方式，还有大国担当。那其实呢这些影响呢其实都是和世界可以交融、同时萌生机遇的一些领域。那其实呢一个小组的访谈哈，还是想从这个
基础设施建设这个方面开始聊起。其实50年前，中国就已经开始到海外去做基础设施建设了。但是现在在这个“一带一路”倡议之下，我们既然说这个新时代，咱们尤其是国企走出去的过程当中，咱们带出去的东西，以及能够带回来的东西，以及能够带给全世界的东西，和50年前相比，或者说和10年前相比，有什么不同吗？
What difference do we bring to the world?
包括我们在座的各位央企啊，这个在基础设施建设，在这些问题上呢，就是我们过去的10年、过去的5年，它的设计理念、技术水平、制造水平已经发生了根本性的变化。我们很多企业呢，在世界同行业当中是排在前列。
have changed, and lots of SOE, Chinese SOE, at the top level. We have 100 SOE or 100 Chinese enterprises among top 500. So, in this going global and international, Chinese enterprises bring not only the infrastructure and equipment, but also their experiences and their vision for the future and to the country that receive investment. So the impact is very strong. Locally to the local economy and the local society and the local development. So I think this is our policy of going global that
我觉得说到这个哈，我刚才看到这个赵总非常的关注哈，因为我而且频频的点头，我觉得可能您切身也有很多这个经验。因为很有意思的是哈，您作为这个其实算是私营部门的这样的一个投资人，您是参与到了央企在“一带一路”上面的投资。那我们通过一些广告概念，能不能跟我们大家分享一下这是什么样的一个体验和感受？
SOE's project. So can you share with us some experiences? So I will give you some examples. So you said we have the contribution to the global economy.
成立了一个“一带一路”玻璃产业基金，这是十分专业的。同意了10年前参与了国企改制，当时一个企业叫江苏玻璃集团，现在是中国玻璃。 这个通过改制呢，这个企业已经变成在香港上市，这个中国最大的平板玻璃制造商。最近呢，又重新引入了央企作为主要股东，准备呢让中国玻璃走向世界，变成一个跨国公司。就像肖主任去年说的，打造全球有竞争力的、占优势的。 跨国公司，
As President Xiao said, we wanted to create a major and strong company. So lots of strong and big Chinese company.
全球又本地的公司参与新的国际规则的制定。我们成立了一个3亿美元的基金，沿着“一带一路”。第一个项目是哈萨克斯坦。 一个玻璃线，这个国家只有一个在建的玻璃线。当时是这个国家和美国一个公司在合作，几年下来一直进行不顺利。“一带一路”的倡议起来之后，央企就说：“我们有最好的设计，我们有最好的工程，我们也有最好的技术。”我们就用这个基金呢，就把这个线买下来。今年8月份就要开始达产。然后呢，这个基金呢会沿着这个线，在非洲。 甚至到欧洲，最终呢到美国，一路通过建设和收购的方式，打造中国玻璃的这个产业链。像这样的一个做法，和以前中国生产、全球出口、销售，然后引发各种贸易摩擦是完全不一样的。它是把中国的优质的产能和技术输出到它的市场。
had some conflict with other countries, but now we share our experience and technologies with local companies, and we share our talent and our human resources. So I think this is an approach that we can adopt as Chinese enterprises, especially for the SOE. What's the return on investment? We are private company, so we should give interesting return on investment. This should be good and should be beneficial, profitable. So this is a good
example to show that we can have a complementarity and we can cooperate together to make more money. So not only the SOE, but also private companies can take
HSBC has received an award for being the best overall international bank for the Belt and Road Initiative. But I was also reading a report from your chief China economist, Chu Hongbin, and then he was actually writing about that. Currently, over 90% of investment for Asian infrastructure projects are funded by the public sector. And usually the private sector, they're looking at very incentive-driven risks and returns. And then how do you justify that from a private sector perspective?
Yeah, I think the significance of Belt and Road is, again, we view profound for China and for the region and the rest of the world. I think the Belt and Road in some instances is spoken about 60, 65 countries. We've seen in our own discussions with people, this goes far wider. This goes to 90, 100 plus countries. It has the ecosystems that are created are very significant. The elements that are important from the private sector view, and I think as John has said, the two elements that we look at in Belt and Road are around the design of the instrument itself and the risk mitigation of that. So the design, looking at the tenure, looking at the slice of the special project that is looked at, putting this into a form that is increasingly standardized to be able to allow others to come in and make a market. This is still in process, and it may be. I think this is months, years, not days in fixing. This will take a long time to get the design right, such that it will become an asset class of significance. And the other element, I think, is for the private sector. I think the other element is clearly risk mitigation and ensuring that we, to the best of the ability, the risks are mitigated, and whether there are guarantee and other mechanisms that are put in to be able to resolve this. Again, it's related to the design. I think there's huge appetite from private investors to come into infrastructure. But I think the challenge is just in designing the right instruments that, again, will allow them to ensure that their investor base, the owners of the assets themselves, not the asset managers, have comfort, and the additional risk they're taking is rewarded appropriately.
我想问一下，就是赵总哈，您做这个股这边做债，不知道比如说和 HSBC 过去有合作吗？或者是像这样的一个
cooperate with HSBC
Well, we've
before?
always collaborated with banks, including SHBC, in leveraged buyout when we did the acquisition of Peace Express, which is UK-based consumer brand, and multiple bankers, including HSBC, participated. With Belt and Road Initiative, the opportunity is vast, especially, like I just said earlier, with the Glass Fund. We, as a private sector player, we needed to see it's economically viable. When we have that work done, banks typically like to work with us so that we could have a balanced capital structure. So more to come. And again, I want to just also emphasize Belt and Road Initiative actually demonstrated the strategic responsibility that China is carrying for the future world, where you share the economic growth, but you also share the way to do things, and then establish new rules in terms of collaboration.
Okay, Mr. Gurria, in fact, your home country, Mexico, sits along the Belt and Road. So I was reading that the OECD actually got a framework for the governance of infrastructure, and it actually laid out 10 key challenges, such as having a strategic vision, useful life of assets, resilient public demand, and the right use of data, etc. So how would you assess China's Belt and Road Initiative?
Well, first, it's in the context of a already happening transformation of the production model in China. Okay. Now it's been 3-4 years when it was announced, even from the 5-year plan before, that there will be a shift from exports to consumption, that there will be also a shift from investment to more services. That means a kind of a better China for the Chinese. Huh? And this is actually happening. You see investment as a total in the GDP coming down, you see consumption going up, and you see more people moving into the cities under better conditions with the normalization of the hukaos that were pending, and now, densification, urbanization, etc. So I would say what is changing now is that all these discussions about growth, infrastructure, and the Belt and Road, and about recovery and everything is in the context of a more more considerate, a more careful China about people more at the center. For example, poverty in China has declined substantially from 30% in 2005 to maybe about 6% now. But what Liu He told us over lunch is that there's a specific target of 30 million Chinese that are under the extreme poverty line to be rescued over the 3-year period to 2020, 10 million per year, okay? So this is beyond whatever, progress you can have because you got a new job or whatever. Now, the social mobility, the revitalization of rural areas, for example, the urbanization process. Now, cities are now holding more people, even in China. Majority of Chinese people now live in cities rather than in the rural areas. So you have to catch up in there. And this question of lifting all the boats, the middle class, which is foreseen as a major driver of this pattern of more consumption, and because it has more income available. So in that context, you have the Belt and Road Initiative, which is both domestic, but also for, as was mentioned here, about 100 countries that really could be touched by this initiative.
So it's like a win for all, and then it could be like very much people-centered.
And a multidisciplinary approach to issues, but very importantly, balance between productivity and growth and inclusion. Balance between productivity and growth and inclusion. This is a very important new approach and new emphasis in this new era of China.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gurria. 也想问一下克宇哈，因为克宇呢不光自己研究这个全球化，而且其实你的父亲也是“一带一路”建设的一个深刻的参与者了。那其实我也读了一些您的这个论文哈，不管是中文还是英文的，讲到其实需要一个这样一个全球化的网络连接起来，才可以最大化的发挥它的价值和效能。但是呢，现在全球其实也有不管是担忧的声音还是质疑的声音。所以说，当我们在讲这个“一带一路”建设的时候，可能你自己说还是需要一个令人信服的。
Initiative. So you said we need a convincing data or convincing reason for the world. What's your reasons? I think lots of people talk about the one road, one belt, but I think we lack the communication with the world. This is the main reason behind the one road, one belt initiative. For many pressures, reasons, including political pressure, lots of countries need our support. So I can say it's from a political perspective that there is a real need. And there is also economic need behind this initiative. So I would like to elaborate a little bit. So this initiative is about a network. Network has an effect, impact, like internet. If you have more participation in the network, and you can have more effect. If you have infrastructure in Kenya, but if Angola cannot be connected to Kenya, you cannot do more. And very often, lots of projects are in small countries, and these small countries have no capacity, enough capacity. to do their infrastructure. And China, with this initiative, tries to create a platform with the participation of all other countries. And for the states, for instance, when the states helped the Europe, the country tried to create a platform with the participation of other countries, like now China.
Please, Mr. Shao. I agree with her. Belt and Road Initiative has been proposed by China, but it should belong to the world. So Belt and Road Initiative is really an initiative for the world. It's not only with the participation of Chinese enterprises, it's also counting on the participation of the world so that it could benefit the world. And Belt and Road Initiative is a long-term strategic project. It's not only a short-term project. Of course, we're talking about infrastructure. We have to build them together. We have to share together. But to make the content more concrete and more enriched, we have to take a longer stand. We have to look at it from a long-term perspective. It will be able to contribute to the development of the world economy as well as the businesses who are involved and bring more market opportunities to those involved. I think that there are many guests who show their interest in the Belt and Road Initiative, and in fact, some of them said that they are not aware that on this forum, in this Davos forum, we will have a lot more. We would have so much more to talk about in terms of Belt and Road Initiative. So I believe that our discussion today have already answered many of your questions or echoed with some of your opinions. Infrastructure indeed is more felt by the external world external to China, in terms of the Belt and Road Initiative. And China has also defined its new era as the era of innovation. Innovation can be brought by science and technology, but the other one is the new business model. For example, last year, we have the quantum satellite and FAST. And we are also seeing new models such as shared biking and shared transportation. All these new models of business or service are not only enhancing the quality of life of Chinese citizens, but across the world. As Mr. Shao said, the innovation and improvement of state-owned corporations are ongoing. So what should we do that would allow state-owned companies to have that kind of competitiveness necessary in this world of innovation? What kind of innovation should we do? Well, Davos as a platform is really an opportunity for all businesses to come together and exchange our views and learn from each other. In terms of innovation, I believe that we need new paradigm. Although we are state-owned businesses or state-owned enterprises, it doesn't mean that we're rigid. We need to be more energetic. Second, innovation will come from not only products, but mechanisms. We have to seek new business models, new economic development models. Thirdly, this innovation process should be an open one. It should be in a globalized one. No one business or one type of business can conduct or undertake innovation alone. That kind of innovation would be limited. Therefore, China's opening up itself in itself is innovation. Innovation means reform, and it's combined with openness. This is a perfect combination. I believe that will lead us to this new world. So I would like to ask Mr. Zhao, well, as you standing on the very forefront of the market and investment, in the past when we talk about investment and innovation, we always think about Silicon Valley from the US. But now today, we're seeing that in terms of technological innovation and funding as well as investments, we're seeing a more integrated global community. And in this new context,
where does China stand?
很大的市场。
Firstly, allow me to clarify. China is a very big market.
超过4亿，而且还在快速增长的
over 400 million middle class
这个可以
families.
支撑很多事情。过去
This
已
will
经
be
是这
able
样。
to support
中国的这个
quite
经
a
济
bit
增
of
长
weight. In
会
the
持
past,
续的
the
在一个
economic
较高的速
development of
度，
China
会是
was
整
growing on
个
a
世
very high
界
speed.
增长的火车头，
Normally,
就像过去一样。
it's the
它分为
locomotive
存
of
量
the world
和增量。
world
存量里面，刚才
economic
肖主任已
growth.
经认真的
So
说
you
了，
can
你好
say
比说
that,
占中国经济
for
体里面
example,
很重要的一个组成部分的
it
我们
would,
的国有企
we
业
are， talking about
他们
speed
从体
and
制、机制、
quantity.
技术、市场
We can
到
say that
模式，
state-owned
都在不断的寻
enterprises
求继续增长，这是世界
who
经济里面
accounts
很
for
重
a
要的一
very
部分。
big
我
part
们
of
另
the
外一个和
Chinese
央企合
economy.
作
They
的
are
就
trying to
是玻璃纤
revolutionize.
维
They're trying to reform.
这
They're
个
trying
中国
to
玻纤现在叫中
become
国巨
better
石。
and enhance
玻
the
纤呢，
quality.
由于
This
中
would
国的
have
市
an
场大，
important impact.
这个培育了一轮又一轮的技
China's
术。现
market
在
is
我们
very
的技
big,
术
and
在
our
全球是最先进
technological
的。
advancement
最近发生了一个逆
is
转，就
beyond.
是前年
Its speed
我们
is
配
really
合中
beyond
国巨石
description.
投资3亿美元，
About
在美国南卡去买地
2 years
建工
ago,
厂。
we bought
把
land
这
in
个
South
美国是他们最重
Carolina
要
of
的
the
出口市
U.S. and
场，现在就
invested
把工
$300
厂
million
直接开到市场里
US
面，
to
这个很
establish
受欢
a
迎。
factory.
这个，但是让
there.
我最感动的就
And
是
it has
整
been
个的
quite
技术装备
popular among the local
都是从
populations. It's
这
welcomed.
个中国浙江的桐乡制
So
造好搬
what
过去的。因为
really,
当年10几年
really
前，我
moved
们从
me
美国引
is
进
that
技
we
术，引进成套
produce
设备，引
actually
进管
our
理人员。
goods here,
所以只
and
花了
we
十几年的
export
时间
that，to the US.
中国有些
But
很
if you think
先
about it,
进的，
decades ago,
特
we
别是实体
people
生
bring
产
their
技术
goods to
就
be
已经开始
produced
发生了逆转，输出
in
到美
China.
国。这是一个央企
So now we're seeing
没有中国
a
这个巨大的市
reversal
场的培
trends
育，
here.
央企
So
的长期
without
战略
a big
和不断的
market,
尝试，它是做
without the
不到的。
long-term
所以存量
strategy
呢，
of
中国实
state-owned
际上的这个实力
enterprises,
是很大
I
的。
believe
以
that
后
this
我相
would
信
be
世
hard
界
to
越
achieve.
来越会感
So
觉到
in
这
the
个。
future,
除了
China,
这个，
the
中国还有
world
增
will
量，
feel
这就
the
是以移
potential
动
that
互
China
联
is yet
技
to
术突破为
unleash.
中心的。中国的这个
Over the past
这个市场
decades,
大，
our
所以很
development
多
has
应用
focused
场景，
much
特别是
on
消
the
费应用场景
technological development,
是举世无
especially
双
the
的。
application in
中
terms
国呢，
of
有些
consumption
地方是
goods
劣势，
and
但现
services.
在变成
Of
优势。好
course,
比说
in
我
the
们
past,
的
we had
监
certain
管、立
disadvantages,
法，
regulatory,
从某种意义上还
legislative
滞后于
aspects
其他
are
一些发达的
still
经济。
sort of
但一有
lacking
的这种
behind compared
叫
with
做
more
颠
advanced
覆性的技
economies.
术发
But
生的时
when
候，
there is a disruptive,
往往一张白
disruptive
纸写这个
technology,
新的监管条例，
if
要
we
比
have
有
to
很
start
多
from
既得
scratch,
利要增，
our
像这个欧洲发生的事儿，要容易
regulatory
得多。
我其实你
response
说到
will
这
be
个点，
more
我很想起
effective
来哈，
than
其实
the
之前
Western
有一次
countries
是咱们
because
两
we
个，
can
然后
start
包
from
括当时
scratch.
的优步公司
Yes,
的联合
indeed.
创始人和
Just
前
like
CEO
you
卡拉
said,
尼
the
克的时候，其实我们三个有一场
founder
对
of
话，在一个论坛上
Uber
面。当时卡拉尼克曾经提到这一点，
also
他
talked
说
about
作为这样的一个
I can
新
echo
的一
that
个业
now.
态哈，他
He
感
said
觉他
that
去
this
全
is
球
a
的
new
市场，
business,
中国的
a
这个市场
disruptive
反而是在
business.
监管上最
Among
开放
all
的
the
一个态
countries
度。
he has
是他这
visited,
个
China
Uber 创造的
has
这
the
个模式，
most
中国的
open
滴滴在应用
attitude
这个模
toward
式，
this
现
new
在已经反转
business
了。
model.
所以他起个大早，
And
赶个
in
晚集。
fact,
中国的后发优势，
China
特
has
别是在新
already
经济，
developed
特
that
别
kind
是
of
以
similar
移动
model,
互
which is
联
the DD
为
taxi
主的
app.
应用场景。
So
这
in
个
the
中国
future,
呢，
I
优势
believe
是
the
十分明确。
technological
这个
advantage
存量
China
的
would
改
have,
革
it's
创新，
really in
加
the
上这
application
个以科技
front.
为主导的新的经济的创
And
新，
based
结
on
合起来，
this technological
是中
advance
国可以持续的高
plus
速增
the
长的一个很
economic
重要的基础。
that
而这个呢，
economic
再通过
development,
中国做一
this
个负责
will
任的
lead
大
the
国，
future
分享
growth
通过
of
一带一
China.
路，好比说
And
跟
we
世界分
as
享，
an
我
economic
觉得一定会
power
建立一个
will
新的世界格
be
局。
able to
我也想
share
听
the
一下克
fruit
宇的
with
分享哈，因为克
other
宇呢是
countries
一
or
个
other
这个
parts
学
of
贯
the
中
world
西的
through
学霸
our
了，不
Belt
管
and
从
Road
中国到
Initiative.
这个哈佛
And now I would like
本
to
科博
ask
士，然后又
Ke
到现在在英
Yu,
国在
because
伦敦
you
要
have always been the elite, let's say, of the economic world. And you understand very much both Western and the Eastern world. You understand China and the Western world. And many people said that in the future, the economic competition will take place mainly between the US and China. And many say that business B2C service and products are more developed in China, but in terms of B2B, China is still lagging behind. So what's your view on these business models and in the future? What's the trend for these development? Indeed, this is very important. When we talk about trade and financial aspects, the more concrete point is is really the technological cooperation or competition. China indeed is a great market for internet-driven businesses. It's even more optimal compared to, even more suitable compared with the U.S. market or other Western markets. And second, let me come to big data. Big data allows consumers to provide their data, and the way we manage and gather data is different from other countries. A few years before Alexander Gershon, this is an economist who proposed the economic backwardness theory, stating that when your current framework is not yet fully established, it's more likely for that country or for that economy to leap forward and jump through certain development stages. So this is exactly what China is doing. And of course, our economy in China has certain restrictions due to the controls in the current circumstances. In the future, we can see that service sector will be very important because it brings job creation and it stimulates consumption. And in the future, I believe China and the U.S. need to cooperate in terms of technology. Of course, currently we have political factors at stake, and we have big businesses to China and the big U.S. business to China and big Chinese businesses to the U.S. There are still roadblocks, but there are still
because actually I talked to UBS chairman Mr. Weber this morning. He actually positioned UBS as a leading global fintech firm. But then speaking of innovation in the financial sector, we know that a lot of these emerging markets, they're leading the pack, especially talk about mobile payments. China, back in 2016, the size of mobile payment is actually 50 times of that of the United States. So, and also these countries are trying really, really hard in terms of adopting all these new technologies like artificial intelligence. So from your perspective, a traditional financial institution perspective, and how do you cope with that? And how do you see the competitive landscape, and how do you see possible collaboration?
Yeah, I think it is a very different landscape to the one we've seen previously. I think if I can just take a step back, the one thing that we didn't talk about, which I think is just worth just 2 or 3 seconds on, is the point about Belt and Road and the President Xi's note that it should be green, low carbon, circular and sustainable. The whole area of sustainability, given the Paris commitments and the need for $100 trillion of infrastructure investment, particularly in energy, and China is very significant to this, I think is an area, is another whole area, but I think we would be remiss in not including this in the general discussions. With regard to the fintech side, I think, as with all innovation, we have to embrace, not fight. We have to look for partnerships. We have to look for different arrangements, structurally, organizationally, etc. The investment, and we have been working with different prototypes, whether it's artificial intelligence, whether it's big data, whether it's genetics and genomics. There's a whole series of different projects, the whole Bitcoin technology, all of this, I think, is something that we have embraced. And ultimately, in its extreme, between the established companies, the BRICS and the cliques, the newer companies, the Alibabas and others of the world, there is somewhere between the two extremes. It is the winner of this, and there may be many winners, will have to find ways to work with new technology, will have to look to reinvent, will have to look at their current business model and tear some of it up to start again in some instances. And as you've said, the payment space, I think, is one of those. Ultimately, where value can be added and the efficiency of the Chinese systems and others. Can we be competitive in that space? These are the questions that I think we're asking as established banks. But I think there are many advantages, but I think there's a constant need to look to reinvent, a constant need to think about the model and an ensuring that not for 1 second do we remain complacent. The investment in technology, the market leading, whether it's artificial intelligence or any other aspect of the technology, we know how much investment is going in from the Chinese side. We need to look at matching that, if not exceeding it.
Yeah, thank you. And on that note, I want to ask Mr. Gurria. I know you, in a lot of your recent speeches, you talk about the emergence of global value chains. And also, you talk about that in your speech when you visited China last September on challenges and solutions for globalization. So how do you perceive the shift in global value chains, and where do you see China positioning itself?
This is about the way in which we have already organized and are continuing to organize production. Production of what? Of everything, okay? Now, global value chains means that businessmen and women have found partners that they trust, that they feel comfortable, but they're also competitive, cost efficient, and where the proverbial division of labor among the different countries, depending on your comparative advantage, is going to be produced, and therefore you have, as the name suggests, a chain where you are adding value in each one of the segments of the chain. In the end, it may go back to the original where the technology is coming from, perhaps, and then they will be in charge of, for example, marketing or selling, etc. But what you're having here is particularly a very challenging situation for SMEs. Now, remember, every time you see that two big giants are going to merge, what happens? This includes, Chinese companies, German companies, American companies. They say the first thing that this is big synergies. What does synergies mean? That they're going to have 20,000 people laid off, and the price of the stock goes up. It's kind of a perverse logic, Now, what happens with the SMEs? SMEs are the place where jobs are being created. SMEs is the place where you're adding to the jobs, where you're compensating for these consolidations of the large economies, etc. But they have to be multiplied by tens of thousands in every single country in order to actually make a difference in terms of the numbers. Yeah. So you have to have a system. But are these SMEs in each country part of the global value chains? And the answer is, in many cases, no. They are isolated. SMEs in many countries means small, but staying small, low technology, very low number of employees, etc. And you basically are talking about public policies and also the larger companies, many of which are around here, to be integrating on the supply chain to have this global value chain, which in the end makes the final product competitive. Not the company in its headquarters competitive, but the final product competitive to compete where? In the headquarters of that company and in China, in Europe, all over the world. This is why multilateral approach of which global value chains is a very important part, is a much better, more efficient approach than going it alone or trying to keep all the production in any single country. The businessmen and women have a certain wisdom that they have been practicing, and that is integrating these global value chains all over the world. China is a very big player in the global value chain. So is my own country, Mexico. And that should continue to be the case, rather than trying to keep individual countries, from isolated from the rest of the world and doing all the production in a single place.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Gurria. 我觉得古利亚先生今天就很多的也谈到了这个如何包容性发展，以及说以人为本等等的方方面面。那其实接下来呢，我们有很简短的时间，我们会留给咱们在座的观众朋友们1个到2个问题，大家可以这个举手发言。如果没有的话，我们会继续和
anyone in the audience to raise a question or make a comment. Thank you.
So thank you so much, everybody, sharing us a very fantastic dialogue. Can I have a question to Mr. Greer-Angel? So you have mentioned that the openness very important, but till today, China, although it's second largest economy in the world and a very strong engine for the global economy, but till today we cannot be the member of OECD. So what do you comment on that?
Very simply, that the reason why you're not a member of the OECD is because you haven't asked. Actually, let me just say, Li Keqiang came to the OECD, and he brought a message by the Chinese government that they were willing to join the Development Center. So China is a member of the Development Center, like Brazil and Indonesia and India, South Africa, etc. But of the so-called key partners, those 5 countries, China, Brazil, China, India, Indonesia, South Africa, the only country that has asked to join the OECD is Brazil. And so we are in that process. Hopefully, we can promote Brazil to start the process of joining. In the case of China, we have said repeatedly, we are not going to be pushing the membership of China. We just work more and more with China. We have been working for 23 years with China. I visit China 2-3 times every year. I go to the China Development Forum. All our people go to Boao, they go to Dalian, they go to all these. But also they work individually with each of the ministries. So the partnership with China is very strong and growing and getting stronger all the time. I would say partnership, membership, maybe it will come naturally. We are creating a room for comfort, where the Chinese will feel comfortable, will feel at home, and maybe then they will ask for full membership. Right now, it doesn't matter. We will still continue to work with China closer and closer. Then there will be a time when they decide, like they did to join the Development Center, they're now members. Now maybe they will be asking to join the full OECD, and they will be very welcome.
OK， 我们其实应该现在还有大概3分钟的这样的一个时间，
We still have about 3 minutes left.
只是想还有一个问题没有触及到，
we still have
我想请这个赵总和肖主任哈，其实从很短的两个方面来跟我们谈一下。我们讲到了这么多的全球融合，但是在这个融合的过程当中，比如说文化上的融合，你们有没有什么样的案例？包括说肖主任可以跟我们总结一下，在这个融合的过程当中碰到过什么，以及可能会对全球带来的机遇。咱们先从赵总开始吧。
opportunities that could be brought by this kind of cultural convergence. Culture is related to history. China has a very long history, and we also have a wealth of culture. And it is the kind of wisdom that we could provide as a value when we go abroad. For example, we have now just invested in a Hollywood film production film, and they realize that we represent an opportunity for them. So they want to go digital, and now they are going global with Chinese funds. And now they can even compete with other larger filmmakers in the market. So they are leveraging on the growth of economy and the rise of China. Let me come to the humans' common destiny. A shared future of mankind proposed by Mr. Xi, which is really in line with the Davos Forum. Just as I said 10 years ago when I attended the forum for the first time, the world welcomed China's participation, but China accepted passively the world order. But last year, China has taken on a more proactive view. For example, we proposed this common future, common destiny for mankind. We proposed the initiative of One Belt and One Road, and in establishing a more inclusive and equitable as well as equal society. So this would be the largest contribution China can bring to the world. So after our debate, I would like to invite Mr. Xiao to make a summary. So in this new era, what exactly is the opportunity that China can bring to the world? It's development and prosperity. Development, as we have all
talked about is to build together and share the fruits together. And I would like to echo what Mr. Zhao and yourself just said. Chinese people attach great importance to harmony. Of course, competition is one thing. In this era and the future, I think we can not only talk about competition, we must also talk about collaboration and cooperation. Without that cooperative framework and without that cooperative paradigm, it's hard for us to achieve any progress alone. Therefore, in the future, in this new era, cooperation is the key. Thank you.
好的，非常感谢各位。Wow, yeah, there's a minute left. 我刚才一直没有注意到这上面是有一个时钟，还一直在看表。1分钟的这样的1分钟的这个时间，其实我觉得今天呢，咱们在座的好像感觉有点意犹未尽哈。每一个问题大家都还想做出这样的一些补充，但是不管是从今天早上刘贺主任的这样的一个讲话，是对去年习近平主席的这个发言的这样的一个延伸，还是到我们今天的各种各样的讨论，其实我们看到了共商、共建、共享，还有开放和包容，其实是我们摆在这里的一个态度。同时呢，今天上午的这样的一个讲话，我们也看到今天很多的嘉宾去聊，说第一次的是比较细致的列出来咱们具体的，比如说3大攻坚战是什么，咱们供给侧结构性改革这样的一个大主线是什么，而且比如说3年这样的一个时间，很多嘉宾说过去可能是没有说过的，估计可能他们会说中长期是一个什么样的，可能会说一个更长远这样的一个目标，但是咱们这次讲的非常非常的具体，会说不管是从一个顶层的态度，一个顶层的设计，直到具体咱们实施的一些具体的方法。
And this time, it's indeed have seen new progress. This has sent out more concrete and certain messages to the world. And the world can expect China to display this kind of attitude of openness and inclusiveness to contribute to the prosperity and opportunity of the world.
Right on time. 说了1分钟的总结，就是为了把这个时间给说满，1分钟都不能落掉。
Okay, that's why I had the last minute of summary. I just don't want to waste any second.
Thank you very much for coming. 谢谢。